Sebastian Drake's life was gilded in success. Few men could say they'd built a billion-dollar empire by the age of 40, but Sebastian wore his triumph with a restless pride. People described him as magnetic, driven, and occasionally ruthless. From his penthouse office in Manhattan's iconic Drake Tower, named after his own global investment conglomerate, Sebastian believed he had the world at his feet. Yet as he gazed out over the urban sprawl late on a Wednesday evening, his heart felt strangely heavy. He frowned, rubbed his temples, and wondered why victory felt so hollow. On the surface, he had everything, a wealth that newspapers speculated reached into the billions, a beautiful wife named Evelyn, and an endless queue of admirers. The tabloids had once called him America's Silver Lion, referencing his streaks of prematurely graying hair that lent an air of maturity and distinction. 40 floors below, the early spring wind whipped across the streets, sending pedestrians rushing into cafes or scurrying into their apartments. The city's pulse was electric, mirroring the persistent hum in Sebastian's mind. He kept thinking about Evelyn, his wife of 5 years, who had recently undergone a routine surgery. With his impossible schedule, he had barely managed to visit her at the hospital. And Evelyn, in her gentle and selfless way, had insisted she was fine, urging him not to worry. Sebastian was not a man who took orders easily, especially not from those he loved. He was far too accustomed to orchestrating the world around him like a maestro controlling a symphony. But things had changed between him and Evelyn. Where once they walked in step, sharing laughs and planning for a future bursting with philanthropic dreams, now an unspoken distance loomed between them. He closed his eyes, letting the day's anxieties roll off him. In that moment, a memory hit him, the day he met Evelyn at a fundraising gala in Paris. She'd been wearing a silver gown that shimmered under the chandelier lights, a walking embodiment of elegance. He had been immediately taken with her. Unlike the other social climbers in the room, Evelyn spoke softly about her passion for child welfare programs. She barely recognized Sebastian from the business magazines. Her unaffected sincerity was the reason he first fell in love. And for a time that sincerity nurtured their marriage. She believed in him, trusted him. In many ways, she was his grounding force. He should have felt complete. But a voice in his mind whispered that something was missing. Evelyn was his wife, but their bond, once so electric, had faded to a dull flicker. He found himself pacing the corridor of his own emotions, uncertain which door to open, which direction to follow, and how to reconcile the longing for more. "Mr. Drake," came a voice from behind him. His personal assistant, Alvaro Delgado, a meticulously organized, soft-spoken man he'd hired years ago, stood at the threshold of the office. "Yes, Alvaro?" Sebastian turned, quickly locking the swirl of personal thoughts behind a careful expression. "I just wanted to remind you about the board meeting tomorrow at 9, Alvaro said, "and to let you know that your car is ready." "Thank you," Sebastian replied, his tone even, but his mind elsewhere. "I appreciate your diligence." As Alvaro left, Sebastian flicked off the office lights. Down in the darkened elevator, he tried to focus on business expansions, new ventures, and the next big takeover, yet all of it felt suffocating, a hollow pursuit. When he arrived home, he found the penthouse oddly quiet. Evelyn had insisted on staying at the hospital for the night after her surgery to be monitored, the doctors said. The space, always pristine, now felt too clinical. Sebastian walked past the living area's panoramic windows, offering a shimmering night view of Central Park, to find the bedroom. He paused at the sight of their wedding photo on the dresser. Evelyn beaming, Sebastian staring straight at the camera, one arm around her. Where had that man gone? The man in the photo looked more carefree than the one standing in front of it. For reasons he couldn't quite articulate, Sebastian felt the stirrings of a dangerous curiosity, the desire for something new, something to reawaken the passion he once knew. Little did he realize this temptation would soon be fulfilled in the most unexpected and disastrous of ways. The next day, Sebastian resolved to visit Evelyn in the hospital after his morning board meeting. The meeting droned on, with financial forecasts and an upcoming global expansion. Boredom mingled with anxiety as he considered whether his presence had been missed by Evelyn the previous night. Evelyn was the type never to complain. Her calm acceptance often made him worry she had learned to accept too many things. When he finally arrived at New York Presbyterian Hospital, he asked for her floor. The nurse directed him to the surgical recovery wing. His footsteps echoed off the spotless corridors, and he paused at the door to Evelyn's room. Hearing the soft sound of voices, he quietly stepped inside. Evelyn was lying on a hospital bed, her face pale but composed. By her side stood a woman in a white coat, clipboard in hand. She had wavy dark hair pinned loosely at the back, and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. She was in the middle of giving instructions when Evelyn spotted Sebastian. "Sebastian!" Evelyn exclaimed, a fleeting smile brightening her features. The woman in the white coat turned around, a polite but distant smile gracing her lips. She was younger than Sebastian expected, a surgeon who looked no older than her mid-30s. "You must be Mr. Drake," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Dr. Camila Reyes. I performed your wife's operation." Sebastian took her hand, noticing the firmness of her grip and the subtle confidence in her stance. "Pleased to meet you, Doctor," he said, relieved to see Evelyn safe. "How is she doing?" Dr. Reyes glanced at Evelyn. "Your wife is recovering well. We removed a small benign growth as expected. We're going to keep her for observation another day or two, just to be on the safe side. Then she should be able to return home and rest." Evelyn smiled reassuringly, though her voice was soft. "I'm fine, Sebastian. Please don't worry." But worry was precisely what gnawed at him. The idea of Evelyn in a cold hospital bed while he wasted away in silent penthouse loneliness troubled him. "Is there anything I need to do?" he asked Dr. Reyes, wanting to exert some measure of control. "Just be there for her. Make sure she doesn't overexert herself once she's home," said Dr. Reyes, her gaze lingering on Sebastian a second longer than necessary. She shifted her focus back to Evelyn. "I'll be by later to check on you." With a final nod, Dr. Reyes excused herself, the door clicking softly behind her. Evelyn exhaled, as if relieved. Sebastian moved closer and carefully sat on the edge of the bed, trying not to jostle her. "How are you really?" he asked, reaching for her hand. She squeezed his palm gently. "Better now that you're here." "I'm sorry," he said. For once, the words of apology didn't feel forced. "I got so caught up in things that I neglected my husbandly duties." She brushed off his concern. "Your schedule is insane, and I'm used to it. Truly, don't stress over it." But her acceptance only heightened his guilt. And in that guilt, ironically, lived a spark of resentment. He almost wished she'd demand more of him, so he wouldn't feel like he was failing her by default. Moments later, a quiet knock sounded at the door. Alvaro entered, carrying a bouquet of lilies. "I thought these might cheer you up, Mrs. Drake," he said, placing them on the bedside table. Evelyn's face lit up at the flowers. "Thank you, Alvaro. They're lovely." Alvaro nodded in his reserved way before turning to Sebastian. "You have a conference call in an hour, Mr. Drake. Will you be heading back to the office?" Sebastian didn't want to leave Evelyn's side, but the demands of business called. He sighed, standing. "Yes, I'll go, but I'll come by this evening, okay?" She nodded. "Of course. Go handle the world, Mr. Billionaire." Her gentle tease made him smile, but as he leaned in to kiss her forehead, he found himself thinking of Dr. Reyes's parting glance. He had no reason to dwell on it, and yet the fleeting spark he'd felt unsettled him, a warning of precarious roads ahead. What Sebastian couldn't have predicted was that a simple glance in a hospital room would thread itself into his destiny. Dr. Camila Reyes might have been a stranger, but fate had woven their paths together with cunning subtlety. Ambition, longing, and secrets were about to converge, unraveling lives in their wake. A week passed. Evelyn was discharged from the hospital and returned home, much to Sebastian's relief. He made a sincere effort to schedule fewer late-night meetings and spent more time by her side. For a few days, it seemed as though life might settle into comfortable rhythms, but a restlessness still lurked inside him. One afternoon, while tidying up some documents at home, he noticed a business card on the living room table, Dr. Camila Reyes, Surgical Oncology, with a contact number below. On the back, someone had scrawled a personal note. "Call me if you have any concerns. Regards, Camila." Sebastian wondered if the doctor gave all her patients' families such personalized service, or if this was a unique courtesy. Shaking off the thought, he tucked the card away. A few days later, at a charity fundraiser for the hospital, Sebastian attended with Evelyn her first public appearance since the operation. Hosted at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the evening featured a silent auction with proceeds going to patient care programs. Evelyn, dressed in an elegant navy gown, looked radiant but still somewhat fragile. He guided her gently through the entrance hall, greeting acquaintances, fielding polite inquiries about her health. The event glittered with the city's elite philanthropists, corporate magnates and socialites, all sipping champagne beneath the museum's high-arched ceilings. Toward the evening's midpoint, while Evelyn chatted with a friend near a display of Egyptian artifacts, Sebastian excused himself to fetch them fresh drinks. As he made his way through the crowd, he nearly bumped into Dr. Camila Reyes. "Oh, hello," she said, startled, recovering her composure. She was dressed in a floor-length black gown, her hair styled in elegant waves. Gone was the white coat and professional reserve. In the soft glow of the museum lights, she looked radiant and surprisingly vulnerable. Sebastian nodded politely. "Dr. Reyes, nice to see you outside the hospital." She gave a quick smile. "Just Camilla, please. At events like this, I try to leave the title behind." He returned the smile. "Then call me Sebastian. But I have to say, you look far more comfortable at a surgical table than a gala." Camilla laughed, a short but genuine sound. "Guilty as charged. The hospital board insisted I attend to represent the department. How's Evelyn doing?" "She's recovering well, thanks to you. She's here tonight, actually, though she's taking it easy. I'm sure she'd love to say hello." Camilla nodded. "I'll definitely find time to greet her. Evelyn was such a gracious patient." She paused, searching his face. "How about you? You look tense. Something on your mind?" Her question was startling in its intimacy. Sebastian cleared his throat, buying time. "I suppose I'm not used to slowing down," he replied. "Sometimes I forget how to rest without feeling guilty." Her eyes flickered with understanding. "Doctors can relate. The job can be all-consuming." They fell into a conversation that felt unexpectedly effortless. Sebastian found himself intrigued by Camilla's stories of her medical residency, how she'd been inspired to become a surgeon after a childhood friend died of cancer. The honesty in her voice touched a place in him he hadn't felt in a while. She too seemed hungry for real conversation, something deeper than the usual cocktail party small talk. Just then, an announcement over the speaker system called for a moment of attention. The charity's director introduced a special performance by the city's youth orchestra. Camilla excused herself gracefully, promising to see Evelyn later. Sebastian watched her go, the fleeting warmth of their conversation lingering in his mind. Later in the evening, as Sebastian stood alone by a Roman statue, swirling a half-empty glass of champagne, Camilla approached him again. She extended a small white card toward him, a different one from her hospital business card. "Here," she said, an almost shy grin on her face. "I'm hosting a small fundraiser next weekend at my place to benefit a research initiative. It'll be less formal than this, just a few colleagues and supporters. We could use a donor like you and Evelyn too, of course, if you're interested." Sebastian took the card, glancing at the neatly written address in Brooklyn Heights. "I'm sure Evelyn would love to support you. Thank you for the invitation." Camilla tilted her head. "I hope you both can come. I'll email the details. And, Sebastian, thank you for caring about these causes. It really does make a difference." Their eyes locked briefly. The silent tension was as palpable as it was perplexing. Only the hush of the museum and the distant echo of violins saved them from prolonged self-consciousness. Then, with a fleeting nod, Camilla disappeared into the crowd. Sebastian walked back to Evelyn, who was sitting and chatting with an elderly philanthropist. She gave him a curious smile. "You were gone a while," she teased. He shrugged, giving nothing away. "Ran into your surgeon. She invited us to a little fundraiser next weekend." Evelyn's brows rose. "That's sweet of her." He nodded, slipping the card into his jacket pocket. But an electric undercurrent in his veins signaled that something more significant than a simple social invitation had just taken place. Fate had a subtle way of guiding footsteps, forging bonds in unanticipated moments. Sebastian told himself the invitation was innocent, and perhaps it was, but in the tapestry of events that would follow, this invitation would become the thread around which destinies entwined. Sebastian and Evelyn arrived at Camilla's weekend fundraiser with a sense of curiosity. They'd driven across the Brooklyn Bridge in Evelyn's chauffeured Bentley, leaving the polished skyscrapers of Manhattan behind for a brownstone perched on a quiet tree-lined street. Camilla's home, though modest by billionaire standards, exuded warmth. The stoop was adorned with lanterns, and soft jazz spilled out from within. Inside, they were greeted by a small crowd of medical professionals, a few donors, and personal friends of Camilla's. The vibe was casual. People sipped wine, nibbled on hors d'oeuvres, and mingled in intimate clusters. Camilla, dressed in a simple yet sophisticated cream dress, was in the foyer to welcome them. "Evelyn." "Sebastian," she said, genuine delight animating her features. "I'm so glad you made it." Evelyn offered her a gentle hug. "Thank you for inviting us. I feel like I owe you my gratitude for taking such good care of me." Camilla chuckled, ushering them in. "Nonsense. It was my job. But I do appreciate you both being here." Evelyn was soon introduced to a few of the hospital's board members, who immediately launched into discussion about philanthropic initiatives. Sebastian found himself momentarily adrift, drifting toward the open kitchen to grab a glass of wine. Camilla slid in beside him. "I didn't think I'd see you here," she admitted softly. "Why not? You invited us." He took a sip, meeting her gaze over the rim of his glass. She laughed, a slight flush blooming on her cheeks. Fundraisers aren't always a billionaire's idea of a fun Saturday night, especially not in a cramped brownstone. Sebastian feigned a look of offense. "Now you're underestimating me. Besides, I suspect you have an interesting crowd." She leaned a hip against the counter, glancing at the small gathering. Most are researchers, young surgeons, or philanthropists who genuinely care about innovative treatments. Her gaze flicked to Evelyn across the room, who was engaged in lively conversation. "I appreciate you both taking an interest." Sebastian nodded, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach. Standing so close to Camilla in her personal space felt oddly intimate, and there was that intangible tension again, like a current passing between them. As more guests arrived, Camilla excused herself to greet them, and Sebastian joined a conversation about investment strategies for medical technologies. An hour later, the crowd began to thin, leaving a more intimate group. Evelyn, feeling a bit tired, decided to head home early. She found Sebastian leaning against a bookshelf near the back of the living room. "I think I might call the driver," Evelyn said, discreetly stifling a yawn. "Of course," he replied, concern lacing his tone. "I'll wrap up here in a few minutes and come with you." She placed a calming hand on his chest. No, you stay. I can see these doctors are interested in what you have to say about funding. I'll be fine getting home. Just don't stay out too late, okay?" Sebastian hesitated. The right thing was to accompany her, but the flicker in her eyes suggested she was genuinely okay leaving him behind, not wanting him to cut short a potentially beneficial meeting. "All right," he agreed, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I'll see you at home soon." Evelyn departed, and Sebastian walked her to the door, watching as she climbed into the Bentley. A swirl of guilt pricked at his conscience. Evelyn was so trusting, never imagining for a second that her husband might want or need anything beyond the bounds of their marriage. Yet the small living room, dimly lit and cozy, seemed to lure him back inside. The conversation with the medical professional soon tapered off, and Sebastian found himself alone by the fireplace. Camilla eventually returned from seeing off a few guests, noticing him standing there. "She left?" Camilla asked softly. He nodded. She was tired. Camilla poured herself a small glass of wine, then gestured to the couch. "Care to sit? I'd like to pick your brain about some potential donors." Sebastian agreed, crossing the room to sink into the plush sofa. Camilla settled at a polite distance, her body angled toward him. At first, they talked strictly about philanthropic possibilities, corporate sponsorships, philanthropic alliances, the intricacies of hospital politics. But as the hour wore on, their conversation turned more personal. "My father was never around," Camilla admitted, swirling the red liquid in her glass. "He took off when I was 5. My mother worked 2 jobs, so it was mostly up to me to keep things together. I think that's why I found refuge in education. If I studied hard enough, I could steer my life." Sebastian watched her speak, compassion flooding him. "I can relate to wanting control," he said. "My father was a steel worker who barely made ends meet. I swore I'd never be dependent on anyone, that I'd create my own path." A soft smile tilted her lips. "And so you did." He opened his mouth to speak, but found himself momentarily tongue-tied by the realization of how easy it was to talk to her. He felt seen in a way he hadn't in a long time. Their conversation drifted to more intimate territory: dreams, regrets, the conflicts of balancing work with love. The air thickened with something unspoken, a gravity that pulled them closer. Camilla set her half-finished wine aside and glanced at the clock on the mantel. "It's past midnight," she observed, a small catch in her voice. Sebastian felt the hesitation coiling in his chest. He knew, rationally, he should leave, get up, say goodnight, call his driver, and go home to his wife. But the moment felt suspended in time, steeped in possibility and danger. Camilla's eyes lingered on his lips before flicking away. She stood, crossing to the far side of the room to turn off the overhead light. In the dim glow of the fireplace, she turned back, looking at Sebastian. She began, then fell silent. His heart thundered. "This is the line," a voice in his head warned. "Don't cross it." But with a slow, measured step, he rose and moved toward her. When they finally stood face to face, the air between them trembling with unspoken desire, her lips parted as if she might speak or protest. But neither spoke. Their mutual longing was too potent to be ignored. Sebastian leaned in first, pressing a tentative kiss to her lips. Camilla responded, her hands sliding up his arms. The kiss deepened, feeding off unfulfilled needs that neither had admitted before. In that exchange of warmth, they unleashed a flood of desires carefully repressed. Her scent, a subtle mix of jasmine and clinical antiseptic, and the softness of her skin against his, burned into Sebastian's memory. They parted, breathless, eyes locked with the terror and thrill of having crossed an irreversible boundary. Sebastian swallowed, guilt crashing over him, but it did nothing to douse the flames now raging in his veins. "Camilla, She shook her head, placing a trembling finger to his lips. "Don't. If we think about it too much, we'll regret it." He nodded, feeling the storm of conflict raging inside. The man who had always pursued control now found himself powerless against an emotion that felt both exhilarating and darkly forbidden. When he finally left her brownstone hours later, the sun was edging the horizon. In the back seat of his car, Sebastian stared out at the pinkish sky, torn between guilt and a dizzying sense of aliveness. He had betrayed Evelyn, yet he was powerless to deny the truth of what he felt. A single thought pulsed through him like an incantation. Nothing will ever be the same again. Morning came with a heavy silence as Sebastian slipped into the penthouse. The subdued dawn painted the living room in pale shades of grey. He tiptoed across the marble floors, hoping Evelyn was still asleep. But as he neared the bedroom, he found her awake, propped up against a mound of pillows, eyes filled with worry. "Sebastian," she asked, her voice hushed. "Were you out all night?" He froze in the doorway, every muscle tensing. I'm sorry, Evelyn. The fundraiser went late and then—" He floundered for an excuse. "I got caught up talking business, and one of the doctors wanted more details about investment strategies. I lost track of time." She studied his face. Sebastian wondered if she could sense the change in him, if guilt radiated from his every pore. But Evelyn's next words were soft with concern, not accusation. "I wish you'd called. I was worried." He nodded, offering a weak smile. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to worry you." She settled back into the pillows, letting out a tired sigh. "It's okay. Just let me know next time." Struck by her unwavering trust, Sebastian forced himself to approach the bed and kiss her forehead. "I promise." He lied quietly. Over the next few days, Sebastian tried to bury the memory of that night with Camilla, throwing himself into work. But desire cast a persistent shadow. When he closed his eyes, he felt her lips on his, the warmth of her body, the magnetic pull of her presence. He told himself it was a one-time mistake. But fate rarely allows such a neat conclusion. At first, it was texts camouflaged under the guise of updates about potential donors, then phone calls under the pretense of discussing hospital philanthropy. Their conversations inevitably drifted to personal admissions and confessions. He discovered that Camilla was just as tormented by what had transpired. "I can't stop thinking about you," she admitted late one night, her voice a whisper over the phone. "But I feel awful. Evelyn's such a lovely person." The mention of his wife's name made Sebastian's heart pound with shame. "I know," he murmured. "We should probably end this before it starts." A strained silence followed, but neither ended the call. Later that week they met at a discreet cafe on the Upper West Side, sitting in a corner booth far from prying eyes. What began as an attempt to clarify boundaries soon led to an escalation of the very tension they'd tried to contain. "I don't want to hurt her," Camilla said, stirring her latte absently, "or destroy your marriage." Sebastian took her free hand under the table, running his thumb across her knuckles. "Neither do I." But he fell silent. The "but" encapsulated 1,000 unspoken words about how he felt seen in her presence, how her passion for life reignited a spark he'd lost, about the mismatch between the man he was expected to be and the man he feared he had become. In that moment, a decision formed between them, a silent agreement to keep pursuing each other in secret. Consequences be damned. Soon, they were meeting in hidden corners of the city. A boutique hotel in Soho, a rented studio apartment near her hospital. Spontaneous weekend trips under the guise of business and medical conferences. Their affair was an unstoppable force, fueled by longing, guilt, excitement, and dread. Sebastian noticed small cracks in his composure. He became absent-minded in board meetings. Alvaro, ever perceptive, occasionally eyed him with quiet concern, as though sensing something was amiss. Evelyn, for her part, attributed his distractibility to the usual rigors of his corporate life. She rarely questioned him, and her unconditional trust became a silent knife twisting in his gut. Yet, as weeks turned into months, Sebastian felt more alive. He and Camilla shared stolen moments that shimmered with intensity, unveiling glimpses of deeper emotional truths. She confided the struggles of being a woman in a male-dominated field, how she pushed herself to the brink to prove she was good enough. He spoke of his fear that wealth and power had diluted his genuine self, that behind every business conquest was a hollow ache. Their bond deepened beyond mere physical attraction. They found solace in each other's vulnerabilities, forging a connection that felt terrifyingly real, and with that closeness, ironically, grew an undercurrent of tension, a sense that some unraveling secret lurked just beyond their view. One evening, as they lay entangled in crisp white sheets at her rented loft, Camilla brushed a strand of hair off his forehead and said, "Sebastian, there's something you should know." He propped himself up on an elbow, heart pounding at her serious tone. "What is it?" She opened her mouth to speak, then hesitated, her eyes uncertain. "It's nothing," she said finally, forcing a smile. "I just worry about how much longer we can keep this up." Sebastian exhaled, half relieved. "We'll figure something out," he murmured, although he had no plan at all. But that intangible worry persisted, coiling in the back of his mind. The cost of deceit was mounting, and it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. Evelyn's health had steadily improved, and she threw herself into her philanthropic interests with new zeal. She often attended board meetings for a children's charity or visited hospitals to arrange fundraising events. Sebastian knew she was filling her days to keep her mind off his increasing absence. Each time she asked him to attend a function with her, he gave a reason why he couldn't. "You're never around these days," she said one morning, standing in the open concept kitchen where she was brewing tea. "Is something going on at work?" Sebastian, glancing up from his phone, felt a surge of panic. "Work's been intense," he lied. "I'm trying to finalize some big deals." She set the tea infuser aside, steam curling around her. "You know, if we don't make time for each other, we'll become strangers." His chest tightened, guilt thrashing inside. He forced a half smile. "You're right. I'll make it up to you." She nodded, though a flicker of doubt crossed her eyes. "Okay." Yet he made no such amends. Days blurred into nights, while Sebastian and Camilla continued their clandestine meetings. Camilla too felt the guilt. It showed in the resigned slump of her shoulders after their trysts. They agreed multiple times to end it, yet each new conversation about parting ended in another desperate embrace. They were two moths circling a flame, powerless to break the cycle. One day, as he scrolled through business emails in his office, a message from Camilla popped up. Heart-pounding, Sebastian quickly typed a reply, ignoring Alvaro's discreet knock on his door. "Yes, 7 p.m., the usual place," Camilla agreed, and he spent the rest of the day restless, his concentration fraying at the edges. By evening, Sebastian arrived at the small Italian restaurant off Lexington they'd come to favor. The hostess, recognizing him, guided him to a secluded corner table. Camilla arrived shortly after, her face drawn. After cursory small talk, she laid her menu aside. "I have to tell you something, Sebastian." He sensed the tremble in her voice. "Go on." She hesitated, eyes scanning the room. Leaning forward, she lowered her voice to a whisper. "There's a rumor floating around the hospital about us." He stiffened, placing his fork down. "What do you mean?" "Some staff have noticed how often we're seen together. I tried to say it was strictly about hospital funding, but there have been raised eyebrows." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "A nurse walked in on us once when you were visiting my office. We weren't doing anything, but we were obviously close." Sebastian inhaled sharply. "Does Evelyn know?" Camilla shook her head. "I don't think so. If she did, she would have confronted you or me by now." He relaxed marginally, though his heart still thundered. "We have to be more careful," he said, reaching for her hand. "Maybe we should dial things back." She pulled her hand away, sadness clouding her expression. "Dial things back? That's not a solution. If we keep this going, it's only a matter of time before she finds out. And if we end it, what do we do with these feelings?" He had no answer. The truth was, part of him wanted to run away with her, to shed the responsibilities of his life and be free. Another part clung to his marriage, to the history and love he shared with Evelyn. They ended dinner in a tense silence. Outside, rain had begun to fall, the street glistening under the lampposts. Camilla clutched her coat around her as they walked to her car. She turned to face him, tears visible in the glow of passing headlights. "What do you want, Sebastian?" she asked, voice cracking. He let out a ragged breath, brushing a rain-soaked curl from her forehead. "I don't know," he admitted, feeling more helpless than he ever had. They embraced in the downpour, a moment that was heartbreakingly beautiful in its desperation. Then they parted. Camilla drove off into the night, leaving Sebastian stranded on the sidewalk, his soul entangled in impossible choices. For the first time, he felt the weight of the impending doom, the sense that he was living on borrowed time. The darkness of the secret threatened to swallow him whole, and a silent question pulsed through his mind. If Evelyn were to learn the truth, how would any of them survive the fallout? Evelyn's birthday was approaching, and Sebastian decided to host an extravagant gala at the penthouse. The event was equal parts celebration and distraction. He believed that showcasing his devotion in public might quell any rumors that might reach Evelyn's ears. If he lavished her with attention in front of their friends and colleagues, perhaps she'd remain oblivious to his betrayal. In the days leading up to the gala, Sebastian spent a fortune on decorations, a private chef, and even commissioned a quartet to play Evelyn's favorite classical pieces. He also selected a rare diamond necklace from Cartier, an ostentatious gift that felt like a poor attempt to buy her forgiveness in advance. The night of the gala arrived, and the penthouse buzzed with animated chatter. The city's skyline twinkled through floor-to-ceiling windows. Waitstaff glided among the guests, offering champagne and delicacies. Evelyn, radiant in a crimson gown, seemed truly delighted, her eyes sparkling with gratitude. "You've outdone yourself," she whispered to Sebastian, leaning in to kiss his cheek. He smiled, though the gesture felt painful. A knot of guilt twisted in his stomach, and he silently prayed that tonight would pass without incident. Among the guests, Camilla appeared wearing a sleek black dress that accentuated her graceful figure. Sebastian's pulse jumped at the sight of her. Their eyes met across the room, and the electric tension between them threatened to short-circuit his composure. She shouldn't have come, of course. But she was, after all, Evelyn's surgeon. Receiving an invitation made sense on paper. Evelyn noticed Camilla and beamed. "Dr. Reyes, I'm so glad you could make it." Camilla offered a polite smile. "Thank you for having me. And happy birthday." Conversation remained cordial, and to the untrained eye, everything seemed normal. But Sebastian felt he was standing on a precipice. Camilla spoke kindly to Evelyn, and Evelyn responded with sincere gratitude, completely unaware of the undercurrents swirling around her. He wondered if Camilla felt as unmoored as he did in that moment. As the night wore on, Camilla kept a respectful distance from Sebastian, but occasionally he felt her gaze graze him. Each glance ignited that familiar spark, a reminder of the raw passion they shared. It was both exhilarating and excruciating. Around 10 o'clock, Sebastian slipped away from the party, stepping onto the rooftop terrace to catch his breath. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain. He stared at the city lights, feeling an unbridgeable chasm opening inside him. Footsteps behind him. He turned to see Camilla, shoulders tense. "I needed some air," she said quietly. He nodded, exhaling a shaky breath. "This is torture." She looked at him with sorrowful eyes. "It has to end, Sebastian. It's not fair to her. It's not fair to us." A whirlwind of argument spun in his head. The simplest solution, if he truly loved Camilla, would be to divorce Evelyn. But the thought of severing his marriage, hurting Evelyn so profoundly, made his chest tighten with dread. At the same time, he couldn't bear to lose Camilla, the only person who currently made him feel alive. He squeezed his eyes shut. "I'm caught in a trap of my own making," he admitted hoarsely. Camilla's breath caught. She placed a trembling hand on his chest. "Then break free, Sebastian. One way or another, you have to make a choice." She leaned in, her forehead gently touching his. The terrace lights illuminated the tear tracks on her cheeks. For a brief, aching second, they held each other, hearts pounding in silent unison. The door to the terrace swung open, and they jolted apart. Evelyn stepped out, her expression registering mild confusion. "You're out here?" she asked. "Is everything all right?" Sebastian's heart nearly slammed out of his ribcage. "Yes," he forced a laugh. "Camilla and I were just talking about a hospital fundraiser. She stepped out to get some air, and so did I." Evelyn's gaze flicked between them, but she seemed to accept his explanation. "I'm just grabbing some fresh air, too. The party's wonderful, but a bit crowded." She turned to Camilla with a grateful smile. "Thank you again for coming. It means a lot." Camilla ducked her head. "Of course. I wouldn't miss it." A gust of wind swept across the terrace, raising goosebumps on their arms. Evelyn shivered, and Sebastian draped his suit jacket over her shoulders. For a fleeting moment, the three of them stood there, city lights shining below, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. "Shall we go back inside?" Camilla nodded, murmuring something about heading home soon. With forced normality, the trio re-entered the penthouse, stepping into the lavish warmth of the celebration. But Sebastian couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Something irrevocable was coming, like a gathering storm on the horizon. And he was right. The tragedy lying in wait would be far more devastating than any of them could have imagined. A few days after the gala, Evelyn had a routine follow-up appointment at the hospital. Sebastian insisted on accompanying her this time, determined to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. The day's tension came not from his usual business pressures, but from knowing Camilla worked just floors below, in the same building. While Evelyn went in for blood tests, Sebastian waited in the sterile corridor. The hours of waiting felt interminable, giving him too much time to stew in guilt. Finally, Evelyn emerged, smiling but subdued. "All done," she said, her voice low. He stood, taking her hand. "Everything all right?" She nodded, though her eyes darted away. "They'll call with results in a few days. It's just routine." He walked her out to the car, trying to read the subtle changes in her demeanor. "You seem quiet," he observed, as they slid into the back seat. She forced a reassuring smile. "I'm just tired, Sebastian. Let's go home." The next day, while Sebastian was in a board meeting, he received an unexpected text from Camilla. "We need to talk. Urgent." Unable to excuse himself immediately, he spent the rest of the meeting in a state of high anxiety. As soon as it ended, he dashed to his office and called her. She picked up on the first ring. "What's going on?" he asked, shutting the door behind him. "I need to see you now," Camilla said, her voice laced with panic. "Can you come to the hospital?" He hesitated, feeling the walls close in. "That might look suspicious. Let me—" "Sebastian," she interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "It's about Evelyn." Within minutes, he was in a car racing to New York Presbyterian. He used a back entrance, the pulse in his neck hammering, as he reached her office. Camilla stood, arms wrapped around herself, staring at a medical chart on her desk. "What is it?" he demanded, shutting the door behind him. She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "I just reviewed Evelyn's recent tests. Sebastian, she's—" Her voice caught. He stepped closer, heart pounding. "She's what?" Camilla swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "She's pregnant." Time seemed to freeze. Sebastian's mind reeled. "Pregnant?" he repeated, as though the word were foreign. Camilla nodded, a tremor in her voice. "Early stages, but that's not all." The color drained from Sebastian's face. His thoughts stumbled over each other. "We haven't been intimate in months." The realization struck him like a punch to the gut. "That's not possible," he whispered, his eyes searching hers for an explanation. She inhaled shakily. "I'm sorry, Sebastian. I know this is a lot to take in. But there's more. The blood tests revealed, well, we suspected she might have had a genetic predisposition for certain complications. I ordered a few extra panels, and I found something unusual." His voice, hoarse with dread, asked, "What do you mean, unusual?" Camilla hesitated, tears filling her eyes again. "I'm sorry to tell you like this, but it seems you and Evelyn might not be biologically compatible for conception." He stared blankly, not quite processing her words. "So are you saying the baby can't be mine?" Her silence confirmed it. His stomach twisted violently. Evelyn was pregnant, but with another man's child. Anger surged through him, quickly replaced by confusion. Evelyn had an affair? The same Evelyn who had trusted him so much? Guilt pricked at him. He was the one cheating. How was this happening? He grabbed the edge of the desk to steady himself. "Does she know?" Camilla shook her head. "She's not aware of the paternity issue yet. The initial test results just flagged anomalies. The deeper genetic testing I ran, why would you even run that test?" he snapped, anger and shock colliding. Her eyes flashed with hurt. "Because I'm her doctor, Sebastian. I suspected there was more going on. I had no idea this would be the result." He dragged a hand through his hair, breathing ragged. "So you're certain the child isn't mine?" She nodded, tears brimming. "I'm so sorry." Thunderous silence fell. Sebastian's mind raced, grappling with betrayal, hypocrisy, heartbreak. And then another wave of dread rolled over him. Who could the father be? He slammed a fist against the desk. How could she do this? Evelyn, she's so gentle, so caring. He broke off, feeling the sting of tears behind his eyes. Camilla approached cautiously, placing a trembling hand on his shoulder. "I can't imagine how painful this must be." He almost laughed at the bitter irony of their positions. Here he was, the unfaithful husband, now wounded by the possibility that his wife was unfaithful too. Camilla hesitated, meeting his gaze. "If you want, I can help you talk to her. She needs to know about her condition and the child's father. Well, that's a separate matter, but you'll have to confront this." His mind spun, a chaos of conflicting emotions, heartbreak, fury, guilt for his own affair, and the haunting knowledge that life as he knew it had just collapsed. He looked into Camilla's eyes, searching for a shred of solace, but all he found was that shared sense of devastation. They were both caught in a cruel twist of fate, two lovers who had betrayed Evelyn, now discovering Evelyn's own betrayal in the cruelest way. In that moment, Sebastian wondered if any of them would survive this web of secrets and lies. Sebastian left the hospital in a daze, ignoring calls from the office and even a concerned text from Alvaro. He needed to clear his head before speaking to Evelyn. The idea of rushing home to confront her felt impossible. His emotions churned like a storm at sea. Finally, later that evening, he found himself on the penthouse balcony. Lights off, the city sprawled below in shimmering patterns. Evelyn was out at a charity event, or so she'd said. He half dreaded, half anticipated her return, replaying possible confrontations in his head. "Are you pregnant? Is it mine? Who is the father?" His hypocrisy gnawed at him. He had no right to feel outraged when he, too, had been unfaithful. At around 9, the front door opened. Evelyn called his name, and he turned from the balcony, stepping inside. The living room was dark, illuminated only by distant city lights. "Sebastian," she repeated, sounding concerned. She flicked on a lamp. He stood there, arms folded, expression grim. "Sit down," he said quietly. "We need to talk." Anxiety flashed across her face. "What's going on? You're scaring me." He gestured for her to sit on the sofa. She complied, smoothing her dress anxiously. Sebastian took a seat opposite her, resting his forearms on his knees. He couldn't look away from her face, a face he had loved, a face he had betrayed, yet a face that might be hiding betrayals of its own. "Are you pregnant?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She inhaled sharply, eyes widening in surprise. "How—" She paused, swallowing hard. "Yes, I found out 2 days ago. I was planning on telling you tonight." His heart pounded. "Why 2 days ago? Why not tell me immediately?" Tears gathered in her eyes. "Because I was unsure. I still am. The doctor's offices have been running multiple tests. I wanted to be certain. He shot up from the couch, pacing the room. Evelyn, the tests say the baby isn't mine. She rose to her feet, trembling. What? That's impossible, Sebastian. How can you be so sure? He turned to face her. Your doctor told me she found genetic anomalies that show we're not compatible to conceive. The baby isn't mine. So I'm asking you, tell me the truth. Who is the father? Her cheeks flushed with confusion and indignation. I have no idea what you're talking about. I haven't been with anyone else. Sebastian's temper flared. You expect me to believe that? Tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes, because it's true, she cried, voice breaking. I don't know what those tests say or what the doctors told you, but I swear I haven't been unfaithful. He stared at her, heart pounding, mind swirling. Was she telling the truth or lying to protect her secret? Memories flashed through his head, her late nights, her new charity acquaintances, that look of sadness in her eyes. Could it have all been guilt? He softened, momentarily wrestling with doubt. Evelyn, your Dr. Camilla, she told me this. Evelyn stiffened. Dr. Reyes? A flash of hurt crossed her face. Since when are you discussing my private medical information with her behind my back? He swallowed, the guilt intensifying. She called me, said it was urgent. Evelyn shook her head, tears drying into an expression of betrayal. I trusted her. I can't believe she'd tell you something so personal without talking to me first. That's unethical. And you? She locked eyes with him. Have you been checking up on me, Sebastian? You barely had time to visit me when I was in the hospital, but now you're prying into my medical records. He let out a ragged breath, guilt swirling. I'm not checking up on you. This baby issue came as a shock. She sat down again, covering her face with her hands. What is happening to us? Sebastian sank back into the opposing chair, silence stretching between them. He felt like he was standing on shifting sands, uncertain of anything. Evelyn claimed she was faithful. Camilla's test results indicated otherwise. Could the tests be wrong? Finally he spoke, softer this time. Evelyn, if you're certain you haven't been with anyone else, how can you explain the test results? She looked up, eyes rimmed with red. I can't, but I have nothing to hide. A moment of pause. Maybe we should do a paternity test, if that will give you the peace of mind you need. He considered it, his chest tight. All right, we will. She nodded, her voice trembling. Fine, and if it proves you're the father, then you'll know I never lied. But if the test shows you're not, her voice faltered, then I guess we'll have our answer. Exhaustion weighed on them. The conversation stalled in a tense standstill. Evelyn rose from the sofa, tears shimmering in her eyes. I'm going to bed. I can't deal with this anymore tonight. Sebastian watched her retreat to the bedroom, feeling an ache deep in his chest. The swirling doubts pressed in, suffocating him. Either Evelyn was lying, or Camilla's test results were misleading, or something far more complicated was at play. But the tension was too great, the house too stifling. He grabbed his coat and left the penthouse, descending into the neon-lit streets. As he wandered aimlessly, he replayed Camilla's words, Evelyn's tears, and his own betrayal. The entire structure of his life was crumbling, and he was trapped in the wreckage, uncertain how to escape. In the days that followed, Evelyn scheduled a comprehensive paternity test at a reputable genetic laboratory. Sebastian accompanied her, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Neither spoke much, their once comfortable silences now weighed down by unsaid accusations. They had to wait a week for the results. During that time, Sebastian holed up in his office, leaving early and returning late. He avoided Camilla's calls, texting only once to say, "We need space until I figure out what's happening." Camilla replied with a single text, "I understand. I'm here if you need me." His own hypocrisy clung to him like a shroud. The memory of his affair warred with his suspicion of Evelyn's supposed betrayal. He felt like a man stretched across a fault line, waiting for the earth to crack beneath him. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. Evelyn picked up the results after work and asked Sebastian to meet her at home. When he arrived, he found her sitting on the sofa, clutching a sealed envelope. Her eyes were bloodshot from crying, but her posture was upright, determined. He swallowed hard, lowering himself into a chair across from her. The city's late afternoon light cast long shadows on the living room floor, amplifying the solemnity of the moment. "You want to open it?" she asked, voice trembling. He nodded. "Let's do it together." She slit open the envelope with shaky fingers, pulling out the laboratory report. Her eyes skimmed the page, and a cry escaped her lips, a mixture of shock, relief and pain all at once. She handed him the report, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sebastian's eyes scanned the lines until he reached the crucial statement: probability of paternity, 99.9%. He stared, heart hammering, barely able to believe what he was reading. "So, I am the father." Evelyn nodded, sobbing quietly. "Yes, you are." A tornado of emotions whipped through him, relief, confusion, anger at Camilla's misleading conclusion. He looked up, meeting Evelyn's tear-stained face. He wanted to comfort her, to hold her, but betrayal still lingered. Only this time it was betrayal from another angle. Camilla had told him something completely false. Evelyn sniffed, wiping her cheeks. "I told you I was faithful. I would never betray you like that." Shame burned in Sebastian's chest. He remembered the nights in Camilla's arms, the stolen kisses, the whispered confessions. He recalled doubting Evelyn, accusing her, suspecting her of an affair she hadn't committed. Rage flared at Camilla, though a corner of his mind acknowledged that she might have made an honest mistake. "I'm so sorry," he managed, voice shaking. "I didn't believe you. I was so convinced." She looked away, sorrow etched into her features. "That hurts more than you know." The silence that followed was suffocating. Eventually Evelyn stood, wrapping her arms around her stomach protectively. "I think we need some time apart, Sebastian." He stood, alarmed. "What do you mean? You just found out we're having a baby." She stared at him, heartbreak in her eyes. "Yes, we're having a baby, and we need to figure out how to move forward. But I can't do that in this environment of distrust. You accuse me of cheating. You believe someone else over me. I can't pretend that's okay." His throat tightened. "I was confused. The tests Camilla showed me. Dr. Reyes was wrong," Evelyn snapped, her tone laced with anger. "She's the one who tested me, right? She told you the baby couldn't be yours. What kind of doctor does that without confirming? I feel violated." He couldn't defend Camilla. The mixture of his own guilt and her misinformation forged a wedge he might never repair. "I understand," he managed weakly. Evelyn turned away, tears returning. "Please, just pack some things and give me some space." Stunned, Sebastian nodded numbly. He retreated to the bedroom, grabbing an overnight bag. His mind reeled as he realized the magnitude of what he was losing. His wife, the woman he had loved deeply, despite the drifting distance. Now they were expecting a child, and yet the foundation of trust was shattered. He glanced one last time at Evelyn, who stood at the living room window, her back to him. A tremor ran through him, an overwhelming sense of regret, but the weight of his secrets pressed down, and he left without a word. As he stepped onto the elevator, the walls felt like they were closing in. He had nowhere to go but the suffocating emptiness of a luxury hotel suite, or perhaps even Camilla's arms. But the latter was equally tainted. He needed answers. Why had Camilla fed him faulty information? Was it really just a mistake? Or something darker? Sebastian found refuge in a penthouse suite at a 5-star hotel, ironically one of the properties his company partly owned. Alone in the opulent space, he stared out at the city lights, replaying every conversation with Camilla. Her anguish at the hospital seemed genuine, but how could she have made such a grievous error? In the midst of his turmoil, he received a call from Alvaro Delgado, his longtime personal assistant. "Mr. Drake," Alvaro said, his tone cautious. "I've noticed you've been out of sorts. I just wanted to check if you're all right." Sebastian considered brushing him off, but something in Alvaro's gentle concern prompted a confession. "I'm not okay, Alvaro. My personal life is a mess." A long pause. Then Alvaro spoke with careful resolve. "If you need anything or anyone to talk to, I'm here. I've always admired your drive, but I've also worried it might become isolating." Sebastian felt tears sting his eyes. He swallowed hard, maintaining control. "Thank you. I appreciate it." He hung up, a heavy ache in his chest. The next day he mustered the courage to contact Camilla. She didn't pick up. He tried again several times. Nothing. Finally, he decided to visit her at the hospital in person, despite the risk of causing a scene. He arrived in the late afternoon, heading straight for her office, only to find the door locked. A nurse recognized him and mentioned Camilla had taken an indefinite leave of absence. The news stunned him. Desperate, he drove to her brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, heart pounding. He knocked on the door, rain pouring down, drenching his hair and suit. After several tense moments, the door cracked open. Camilla stood there, eyes swollen, hair a mess. She looked like she'd been crying for days. Without a word, she let him in. The living room was dim, lights off, curtains drawn. "Why did you lie to me about Evelyn?" he demanded, voice thick with emotion. "You said I couldn't be the father. The paternity test proves otherwise." Camilla clenched her jaw, tears gathering. "It wasn't a lie. The initial genetic tests showed anomalies indicating you and Evelyn were incompatible. I had no reason to doubt those findings." He threw his hands up. "So you're telling me you just made a mistake that nearly destroyed my marriage, my family?" She swallowed, hugging herself. "I did further analysis after you left that day. I realized the genetic markers I found were incomplete. There was contamination in the sample. I tried to call you back, but it was too late. You'd already left. Then everything spiraled, and She broke down, sobbing. He stared at her in disbelief. "Contamination? You ruined my marriage because of a sloppy lab error?" She lifted tear-filled eyes to his. "I never intended to ruin anything. When I told you I was so sure, I had no idea the sample was compromised. By the time I realized it, I was terrified. I knew how it would look, and I was scared of losing everything." Sebastian's anger mixed with pity. "You should have told me," he said quietly. "You should have told Evelyn the truth immediately." Camilla buried her face in her hands. "I know. I'm so sorry. But I was also afraid of your reaction, afraid of losing my reputation. I've seen how quickly doctors can fall from grace. I've worked my whole life to get here." He took a ragged breath, recalling the passion and closeness they once shared. But now that felt tainted by betrayal and misinformation. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "Evelyn threw me out. She thinks I betrayed her. And I did, but not for the reasons she suspects." Camilla's tear-stained face lifted. "She doesn't know about us?" He shook his head. "No, and I can't see how telling her would help now. It would just tear her apart." Silence weighed heavy in the room. Finally, Camilla rose, approaching him tentatively. "Sebastian, I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this to happen." He sighed, closing his eyes. "Neither did I." Their gazes locked in a moment of shared regret. Once, they'd been consumed by passion, convinced they'd found something meaningful in each other. Now, that love felt overshadowed by pain. He took a step back, tears burning his eyes. "I need to fix this with Evelyn. We're having a child, and I can't let this affair or these lies destroy us." Camilla nodded, though sorrow flickered in her expression. "I understand." Her voice was small, trembling. "I just hope you can forgive me someday." He paused at the door, raindrops trailing off his coat. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. Then he left, feeling as though the walls of the brownstone were closing in behind him. Outside, the storm raged, matching the turmoil in his soul. He realized that even if he could mend things with Evelyn, a part of him would always carry the weight of this affair. And no matter how much Camilla regretted her mistake, some betrayals left indelible scars. Sebastian returned to his lonely hotel suite and agonized over how to approach Evelyn. Days passed without contact. He heard from Alvaro that Evelyn had taken time off from her charity work and was resting at a friend's place. The friend's identity was never revealed, leaving Sebastian anxious and isolated. Finally, he received a text from Evelyn. "Let's meet at the penthouse tonight. We need to talk." A swirl of dread and hope coiled in his stomach. He left the office early, telling Alvaro to clear his schedule. Arriving at the penthouse around 6, he found Evelyn seated at the dining table, hands folded over a glass of water. She looked pale, but determined. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing for him to sit. He lowered himself into a chair, heart in his throat. "Of course." She took a breath, fixing her gaze on him. "I got a call from Dr. Reyes." His stomach lurched. "Camilla called you?" She nodded. She confessed everything about the faulty test results, the contamination, and your affair. The words landed like a physical blow. Sebastian froze, heart pounding. "She told you about us?" Evelyn nodded again, tears brimming. "Yes. She told me how you both started seeing each other after my surgery. She said she couldn't live with the guilt anymore." He slumped forward, shame and sorrow twisting his expression. "I'm so sorry, Evelyn. I never meant—" She held up a trembling hand. "Please, just let me speak." She took a breath, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I believed in you, Sebastian. Even when you doubted me, I forgave you because I thought you were stressed, misled. But this, you cheated on me with my own surgeon while I was sick." He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but no words came. He hung his head, accepting her condemnation. She continued, voice shaking. "I'm pregnant with our child, and the father was off with another woman. I can't even process it. Dr. Reyes told me she ended things with you, but the damage is done." Tears gathered in his own eyes. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. It started as a mistake, and I felt lost. I'm not making excuses. I just want you to know I never stopped loving you. I don't know, searching for something I thought was missing. I realize now it was here all along." Her laughter came out bitter, mocking. "Is that supposed to make this any easier?" She pressed a hand over her stomach, where their baby grew. "You betrayed me, Sebastian. You humiliated me. I don't know if I can ever forgive you." He reached out, wanting to comfort her, but she recoiled. "Don't," she warned, voice raw. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of her quiet sobs. Finally, she spoke again. "I'm going to my mother's house in California. I need to get away from this city, from the whispers, from the memories." Panic engulfed him. "Evelyn, please, let's go to counseling or therapy. Let's try to fix this. We owe it to our baby." A pained expression flitted across her face. "I can't think about that now. I'm too hurt. Maybe, with time, we'll see. But for now, I need space." His world was collapsing. He understood he deserved these consequences for his actions. Still, the pain was staggering. Evelyn stood, her decision final. "I'm leaving tomorrow. Alvaro will handle my flight arrangements. I hope someday we can co-parent in a healthy way. But right now, I can't be near you." She walked to the door, pausing once. Without turning, she whispered, "I loved you, Sebastian. I trusted you. Remember that." Then she was gone. The penthouse felt emptier than ever. Sebastian sank to his knees, a strangled sob tearing from his throat. He had gained power, prestige, and wealth beyond measure, but lost the one thing that mattered most, the trust and love of the woman who had believed in him. Now, as dusk settled, he realized the tragedy of his choices. He had not only betrayed Evelyn, he had betrayed himself, and in the flickering shadows he sensed that no matter what happened next, the innocence of their love was forever lost. In the weeks after Evelyn left for California, Sebastian descended into an existence of hollow routine. He kept up appearances at work, but his colleagues noted the abrupt shift in his demeanor. Once a commanding presence in the boardroom, he now seemed distant, distracted. He signed deals and attended meetings mechanically, as though on autopilot. At night, the penthouse became a chamber of ghosts. Every corner reminded him of Evelyn, her laughter, her soft presence, her philanthropic zeal. The knowledge that she was carrying his child far away from him only compounded his agony. He drank himself into restless sleep, haunted by nightmares of losing everything he once held dear. Camilla, too, vanished from his life. He heard through mutual contacts that she had resigned from the hospital. Rumors swirled that she was taking a position in another city, perhaps out of state. Part of him wanted to track her down, to demand an explanation for her final confession to Evelyn, but a deeper part knew he had no right. His affair with her had set the stage for this catastrophe. Alvaro Delgado, ever the loyal assistant, tried to offer help. One evening, he found Sebastian slumped at his office desk long after closing hours. "Mr. Drake," Alvaro said gently, "you can't keep on like this." Sebastian looked up, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "You're right. I can't." Alvaro paused, then carefully asked, "Have you spoken to Evelyn recently, or considered going to California to see her?" Sebastian shook his head. "She won't return my calls. I send texts and emails, but she rarely replies. When she does, it's only about practical matters like medical updates or legal details." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I want to be there for my child, but she's shutting me out, and I can't blame her." Alvaro nodded solemnly. "Perhaps you should step away from work for a bit, take some time to sort yourself out. The board can manage in your absence." The suggestion brought a flicker of both relief and fear. Sebastian was used to burying himself in work to escape emotional pain, but now the pain overshadowed everything, refusing to be ignored. "I might do that," he said quietly. That night, Sebastian made a decision. He would fly to California, unannounced, and attempt to speak with Evelyn face to face. Perhaps if she saw his sincerity, she might allow him a chance to show he could change. He packed a small bag and booked a first-class ticket on a late flight. As he buckled into his seat, anxiety swirled in his gut. He didn't know if his uninvited arrival would push Evelyn further away, but he had to try something. He couldn't bear the thought of missing his child's birth or losing any last hope of reconciliation. On the plane, memories of better times assailed him. He recalled how Evelyn once teased him about his incessant need for control, how they would laugh about his detailed travel itineraries. Now he had no plan, only desperation. Landing in Los Angeles at dawn, he took a car to the address Evelyn's mother had given Alvaro months before. The coastline glimmered under the morning sun, mocking his turmoil with its serene beauty. His heart pounded as he pulled up to the modest suburban home, a far cry from the penthouse's luxury. He knocked on the door. After a tense moment, the door opened, revealing Evelyn's mother, Grace. She regarded him with a tight-lipped expression. "Sebastian, I didn't know you were coming." He forced a polite smile. "I'm sorry to intrude. Is Evelyn here?" Grace's gaze flickered with maternal protectiveness. "She's resting. Pregnancy has been hard on her, especially with all the stress." He sighed, the guilt once again gnawing at him. "I just want to see her, talk to her. Please." Her mother studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "I'll see if she's up to it. Wait here." He entered, taking in the homey interior family photos, warm lighting, the scent of freshly brewed coffee. It was worlds away from his sterile Manhattan existence. After a few minutes, Grace returned, her face resigned. "She'll see you on the porch," Grace said softly. "Please, try not to upset her." He nodded, stepping through the house to the backyard porch. There, he found Evelyn seated on a wicker chair, hands folded over her slightly swollen belly. Even in her casual maternity wear, she looked regal, though heartbreak lingered in her eyes. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, throat tight. She regarded him with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "You shouldn't have come here unannounced." "I know," he admitted, taking a seat a few feet away. "But I had to." They sat in silence, the sound of seagulls echoing in the distance. Finally he spoke, voice trembling with emotion. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I've said it before, but I'll say it 1,000 times if I have to. I messed up. I hurt you in the worst way. But I'm here because I want to be part of your life, of our child's life." She looked down, rubbing her belly absent-mindedly. "You think just by showing up I'll forgive you?" He shook his head, tears pricking his eyes. "No, I know forgiveness isn't that simple, but I'll do anything to prove I can change." A tear rolled down her cheek. "You broke my trust, Sebastian, and right now the only person I can focus on is this baby." She paused, voice quivering. "I'm not saying you can't be involved, but I don't know if I can ever be your wife again." The finality in her words sliced through him, yet beneath the pain he felt a glimmer of relief that she hadn't completely shut him out from the baby. He reached out tentatively. "May I?" he asked, indicating her belly. She paused, internal conflict flashing across her face, then slowly nodded. As he gently placed a hand on her abdomen, a rush of emotion nearly overwhelmed him. This was his child, an innocent life, untainted by the betrayals of the past. Evelyn covered his hand with hers briefly. "The baby's healthy, according to all the tests," she whispered. "I won't keep you from your child, Sebastian, but please, give me time." Tears slipped down his cheeks. "Thank you," he managed. They lingered in the moment, a fragile ceasefire between them. Outside, the sun climbed higher, illuminating the horizon. Sebastian knew their story might not end happily ever after, but at least there was a glimmer of hope for a future where he could be a father. He would return to New York that evening, leaving her with the space she needed. But his heart remained anchored on that porch where he first touched the fragile miracle he had nearly lost before it even arrived. Over the following months, Sebastian made concerted efforts to be present in Evelyn's life, albeit from a respectful distance. He sent financial support and check-ins, and occasionally flew out to California for prenatal milestones, always staying in a nearby hotel, never presuming to stay with Evelyn's family. Their conversations remained polite, cautious, but at least they were speaking. Then came the 8th month of pregnancy. Evelyn's due date was fast approaching, and Sebastian planned to be in California for an extended stay, determined to be there when his child entered the world. Despite her emotional walls, Evelyn had tentatively agreed to have him close by at the hospital. Fate, however, had a cruel twist in store. Late one evening, Sebastian was in his California hotel suite when he received a frantic call from Grace. "Sebastian, come quick. Evelyn's in trouble." His heart lurched. "What do you mean?" "She passed out. We've called an ambulance. They're taking her to the hospital. Hurry!" The line went dead. Sebastian's heart hammered as he raced out of the hotel, not even bothering to grab his suitcase. When he arrived at the hospital, he found Grace in tears, pacing the waiting room. "She was having pains," Grace explained, voice trembling. "She thought it was early labor, but then she collapsed." A doctor appeared, his face grim. "Mrs. Drake is in surgery. There's a complication, placental abruption. We're doing everything we can." Sebastian felt the blood drain from his face. Placenta separating prematurely could be life-threatening. "Can I see her?" The doctor shook his head. "Not right now. We'll keep you updated." Time passed in an agonizing blur. Grace clung to him, sobbing, while he sat rigid, breath catching in his throat. Memories of Evelyn's laugh, her tears, her gentle spirit, all cycled through his mind. He whispered silent prayers, promising he'd do anything, sacrifice anything, if only she'd be spared. Eventually a nurse emerged. "Mr. Drake, the baby is in distress." "We need your permission for an emergency C-section." He stood on shaking legs. "Do it. Save them. Do whatever it takes." The nurse rushed back into the operating room. Minutes bled into hours, each second an eternity. Finally, the doctor returned, his scrub stained, exhaustion etched on his face. "We delivered a baby boy," he said, voice subdued. "He's in the NICU fighting for his life. As for Mrs. Drake..." He trailed off, eyes heavy with sorrow. "She's lost a lot of blood. We tried everything, but I'm so sorry." Sebastian's world cracked. A ringing filled his ears. "No!" he gasped, stumbling back. "That can't be. She can't be." Grace's wail of grief echoed in the corridor. The doctor's expression wavered, unable to offer comfort. "I'm sorry," he repeated, his voice fading to a blur of meaningless words. Sebastian sank to the floor, collapsing under the weight of the news. Evelyn gone. His strong, beautiful, forgiving wife. The woman who had once radiated warmth and kindness, who carried their child despite the heartache he'd caused. He cried out, tears streaming in a torrent of despair. Nothing in his life, no wealth, no business empire had ever prepared him for this level of loss. In that moment, he would have traded every dollar, every success, just to save her. But it was too late. Sebastian's son survived the ordeal, though he was born prematurely and faced an uphill battle in the neonatal intensive care unit. In the wake of Evelyn's death, Sebastian poured every ounce of his being into the child. Each day, he sat by the incubator, whispering apologies and lullabies, praying that this fragile life would endure. Newspapers and tabloids spun the tragedy into a sensational story. Billionaire's wife dies in childbirth. They gossiped about rumored affairs, whispered about possible malpractice, but none of that mattered to Sebastian anymore. His only concern was the tiny baby who embodied both his greatest joy and his deepest regret. Camilla Reyes reached out once, sending a letter of condolence, but Sebastian never replied. He couldn't bear another reminder of his downfall, nor could he blame her entirely. He knew the real guilt lay in his own choices. Álvaro Delgado remained by his side, facilitating everything while Sebastian grieved. "Focus on your son," Álvaro would say, taking on the burden of business matters. Sebastian was grateful for the loyalty of a friend who never judged, only supported. At last, after weeks of delicate care, Sebastian's infant son grew stronger. The doctors declared he was fit enough to leave the hospital. Sebastian named him Elliot Drake, a nod to Evelyn, the mother he would never know. On the day he took Elliot home, Sebastian stood outside the hospital, holding the car seat with trembling arms. The sun warmed them both, a small mercy from the universe. Elliot's tiny fingers curled and uncurled, clutching at air. Sebastian leaned down, pressing a tender kiss to his son's forehead. "I promise," he whispered, voice shaking, "I'll honor your mother by being the best father I can. I may have failed her, but I won't fail you." Tears rolled down his cheeks as he placed Elliot gently in the waiting car. And in that vow, Sebastian discovered the faintest glimmer of redemption. He had lost the love of his life, but he had been given a chance to protect the innocent life they created together. For the first time in months, he felt a small but resolute spark of hope. He would forge a path forward, driven by a commitment to live an honest and authentic life for his son. Ambition and greed had once ruled him, but now only love tempered by tragedy guided his heart.